He slept in our guest room, but left something behind. I'll never forget it. Started with laughter and wine. Nothing unusual, just the kind of evening you look forward to when routine has dulled the edges of your days. My husband had suggested the party. "Let's have people over again," he said, like it was a cure. And maybe it was. I threw myself into preparing, baking, lighting candles, fluffing pillows, trying to believe that noise and company could fill the spaces neither of us had spoken about in months. That night, the house came alive. Old friends gathered, music hummed softly through the walls, and I found myself smiling more than I had in weeks. Everything looked perfect, almost enough to distract me from how far we'd drifted. And then there was Mark, my husband's college friend. Polished, quiet, kind-eyed. A man I had always known from a distance, present at dinners, weddings, holidays, but never close. Not really. That night, though, something was different. From the moment I opened the door and saw him standing there, I felt it. His eyes lingered just a second too long. Not inappropriate, not overt, but intentional. The kind of look that doesn't say, "You look nice tonight," but instead, "I see you." At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Just a strange flutter of attention in a crowded room. But later, when I found myself alone in the kitchen, and he stepped in quietly behind me, placing his empty glass near the sink, I felt my breath catch. "You always make it feel like home in here," he said, voice soft but steady. There was something in the way he said it. Not flirtation. Not quite. It was warmer. Heavier. Like he was speaking to a part of me I'd forgotten was still listening. I should have shrugged it off. I should have changed the subject, made a joke, walked away. But I didn't. I stood there, towel in hand, heart thudding, wondering why I felt more noticed in that one moment than I had in months. I didn't know then what would follow, that one party would turn into something I couldn't explain, something I couldn't ignore. That what seemed like a fleeting comment would start to peel back a part of me I had hidden beneath smiles and small talk for years. All I knew was this. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. And that feeling, terrifying, intoxicating, and completely unexpected, was how everything began. The party unfolded like most gatherings do, clinks of glasses, the low hum of jazz weaving between conversations, bursts of laughter echoing off the kitchen walls. I moved through the rooms effortlessly, smiling, refilling drinks, laughing at stories I'd heard before. My husband blended into the crowd, cheerful and talkative, hopping from friend to friend like a host who didn't need to worry about the details. That had always been our dynamic. I created the atmosphere, and he absorbed the credit. It wasn't resentment. I felt it was more like quiet resignation. We had grown used to playing our roles. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped questioning it. But that night, Mark stood out in sharp contrast to the background noise. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking. He didn't need to be. There was something steady about him, something grounded, while others competed to tell the most outrageous story, Mark observed. And occasionally, when our eyes met, he didn't look away like the others. He looked into. I found myself noticing him more. The way he rested his fingers lightly on his glass, the way he listened intently to others, how he smiled with just the corners of his mouth. I told myself it was nothing, just noticing. But there was a quiet pull like gravity drawing me to where he stood in the room. Later, I escaped to the kitchen for a moment of stillness, loading a few dishes just to clear my head. That's when he joined me again. "You look like you're always carrying the whole evening," he said gently. I glanced over. "I guess I like when things feel taken care of." "You don't always have to be the one holding it all together," he replied. The words sat with me longer than they should have. Before I could answer, someone called from the hallway, and he was gone. But the silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was electric. As the night wore on, guests filtered out. Coats retrieved from closets, shoes slipped back on polite hugs exchanged. My husband was half asleep on the couch, drained by the wine and the effort of hosting. Mark was the last to leave, or rather, he didn't leave. "You live far," I said, making conversation as I tidied up. He nodded. "Too far to drive safely right now. If the guest room's still an option." Of course, I said, my voice a little too quick. "Fresh towels are already laid out?" He smiled. "You think of everything." I led him down the hall, flicked on the guest room light, showed him the clean linens and the extra blanket. As I turned to go, he said my name softly. I paused in the doorway. "You're kind," he said, "but that's not the same as being seen." My throat tightened. There was something deeply vulnerable about the moment, and I didn't know what to do with it. "Good night, Mark," I said. "Good night." I closed the door, but my heart stayed behind. That night I lay in bed beside my husband, staring at the ceiling long after he started snoring. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the words, the tone, the look. It wasn't a proposition. It wasn't romance, not yet. But it was possibility. And I hadn't felt that in a long, long time. The next morning, I rose early, as always. The house was still like it had exhaled after the noise of the night before. I moved through the kitchen quietly, wiping down counters, folding blankets, clearing wine glasses. Then I heard footsteps. It was Mark. He looked different in the morning light, more relaxed. His shirt was creased from sleep, his hair slightly tousled, and yet he carried the same calm presence. We exchanged small pleasantries, shared a cup of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. But every word, every pause felt heavy with subtext. He watched me not with hunger, but with attentiveness, as if he had studied me in the crowd the night before and was now seeing what was left behind. I felt like I was unraveling, not in a way that was chaotic, but in a way that was honest. My husband emerged eventually, stretching, yawning, thanking me for the lovely evening, as if I hadn't orchestrated every detail. Mark gathered his things. They said their goodbyes, but before he left he turned back briefly. Our eyes met, and he nodded the kind of nod that says, "I see you." I felt it in my chest. Days passed. I tried to return to normal, dishes, laundry, grocery runs, but everything felt slightly askew. I couldn't forget that look, that voice, the way he said my name like it meant something. Then came the message, just a simple text. "Thank you again for hosting. I enjoyed the night. Hope all is well." I hesitated before replying. "You're welcome any time. It was good to see you too." Harmless. That's what I told myself. But once that thread was tugged, it didn't stop. Our messages weren't daily. They weren't romantic, at least not on the surface. But they were frequent enough to become a presence in my life. He sent me photos of books he was reading, quiet spots from his hikes playlists filled with melancholy songs that somehow spoke to exactly how I was feeling. I found myself opening up, telling him things I hadn't even told myself. He asked about my dreams. I told him I once wanted to teach art, that I had imagined opening a little antique shop, that I used to write short stories but hadn't touched a pen in years. He didn't judge. He didn't rush. He just listened. And then one day he said, "You still? Could you know? None of that's gone. You're still in there." It broke me, because no one had said that in years, not even me. That weekend, my husband had another golf outing planned. He left early, barely looking up from his phone. The silence in the house was deafening. At 3 p.m., Mark knocked. He held a book in one hand, wore a soft smile, and looked like someone who understood exactly what he was walking into, but didn't want to push it. We sat in the living room, the book unopened on the table between us. We talked. About everything and nothing. About dreams, memories, the quiet ache of feeling unseen. And when I flipped through the book and found a photograph tucked between the pages, a soft, faded sunset over the ocean, he said simply, "Something beautiful, just for you." I didn't cry, but I wanted to. Before he left, he paused by the door. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for today, for letting me see you." I closed the door after him and stood there for a long time, the photo pressed between my fingers, wondering what part of me he had unlocked and why I wasn't ready to close it again. The days that followed his visit were quieter, but not in the peaceful way I used to crave. It was the kind of silence that comes with realization, with a slow burning awareness that something had shifted inside me. Mark hadn't done anything inappropriate, and neither had I, technically, but we both knew that something had passed between us, a current, a confession without words. I tried to push it aside. I tried to lose myself in routine. I cleaned the house, organized drawers I hadn't touched in years, and even joined a local book club, anything to anchor myself to something solid. But I couldn't forget the way he had looked at me, like I was someone worth knowing. The messages didn't stop. If anything, they became more thoughtful, more deliberate. He would send a photo from a quiet cafe he found on his travels, or a song lyric he thought I'd appreciate. I responded carefully, always carefully, but underneath each exchange I felt it building. Not an affair, not yet, but something dangerous all the same. One day he messaged me a single sentence that stayed with me longer than I'd admit. "You have more strength than you allow yourself to see." It wrecked me. Because it wasn't just flattering, it was accurate. I had spent years pouring my energy into my husband, our home, his friends, his career. I had supported. I had stood quietly beside him at events. I had made dinners, planned anniversaries, smiled when I felt like screaming. And somehow I had begun to believe that was all I was worth. But Mark saw something else. That week I passed the guest room more than usual. I stared at the bed where he had slept, the pillow he had used, the soft dent his presence had left behind. It felt like he had occupied more than just a room. He had carved out space in my thoughts. And then one Thursday he messaged again. "I'll be in town this weekend. I have that book I told you about. Maybe I can drop it off." I stared at the message. I typed and deleted several responses. Finally, I replied, "Sure, let me know when." When Saturday came, my husband had his usual golf outing followed by drinks. I feigned a headache and stayed behind. Around 3, there was a knock on the door. My heart thudded. Mark stood there with a book in one hand, his other hand in his pocket. He wore jeans and a soft navy sweater, casual, unassuming, but his presence was anything but forgettable. "You're actually here," I said. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to be," he replied. We moved into the living room. We sat across from each other. The book sat unopened between us like a peace offering, but we both knew it wasn't about the book. We talked for an hour, about the weather, a new cafe, his recent trip, but beneath every word was something unsaid, a weight, a pull, and I felt it growing. Then I reached for the book. As I flipped through the pages, a photograph fell out. A sunset, soft, blurred, beautiful. "You left this in here?" I asked. He nodded. "I thought you might keep it. Something beautiful just for you." My throat tightened. We didn't touch. We didn't cross any explicit lines. But something irreversible had happened. When he stood to leave, he looked at me one last time and said, "Thank you. Not just for the tea. For letting me see you." I stood there after he left, staring at the door, heart full of questions I couldn't answer. That night I couldn't sleep. My husband lay beside me, peaceful, unaware. I stared at the ceiling, the photograph still in my hand. I had done nothing wrong. But I felt changed. Over the next week, I kept returning to the moment. I thought about the way he listened. The way he looked at me like I mattered not as a wife or a host or a caretaker, but as a woman. Our messages resumed, a steady rhythm, never inappropriate, but always present, always attentive. He would ask about my book club, my garden, my walks. He noticed things. One message simply said, "You move through the world with such quiet grace." Do you know that I didn't? Until he said it. Then came the day he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Are you happy?" It was direct, honest, and it stopped me cold. I didn't answer right away. That evening I sat across from my husband at dinner. We talked, but it was surface level. We always had something to say, but nothing that pierced. I watched him finish his food, glance at his phone, and laugh at a video someone had sent. And I realized I hadn't thought about whether I was happy in years. Later, I stood at the window rereading Mark's question. I typed back, "I don't know. I think I stopped asking myself that a long time ago." He replied only one sentence, "You deserve to." That weekend, my husband left early again for golf. The silence in the house felt familiar now, but not comforting. I sat in the guest room, remembering the weight of Mark's gaze, the way his words lingered. Then my phone buzzed. "I'm near your neighborhood, no pressure. But I'd love to see you if you're free." I stared at it for minutes. My fingers trembled as I typed, "Come by if you'd like. I have tea. No plans." He arrived not long after. We sat in the kitchen this time. Steam curled from our mugs. The sunlight cut through the window and made the room glow. He noticed everything. A candle I had moved. A photo frame I had replaced. No one had done that in years. We talked about my dreams, the art classes I used to take, the antique store I once imagined opening. He asked, "Why not now?" I laughed. But not dismissively, softly, longingly. Then he said, "You're still her, you know? That woman with all those plans. I see her." I couldn't hold back the tears. Not from sadness. From being seen. We didn't kiss. We didn't cross that final line. But the lines we did cross were quieter, more dangerous. When he left, he paused again at the door. "Whatever you choose," he said, "make sure it's for you, not for anyone else." I nodded, unable to speak. That night I didn't sleep. Again. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't ashamed. I was awakening. In the days that followed, I started making changes, small ones. I signed up for a pottery class. I started walking in the mornings again, letting the sunrise hit my face. I began speaking more honestly with my husband, telling him how I felt, what I had lost. He was confused, at first defensive, then quiet, then slowly curious. We talked more. We cried once. He asked if I was unhappy. I told him I didn't know, that I had forgotten how to measure that. Not out of sadness, not out of malice, but out of erosion. A slow wearing down. And now I was trying to piece them back together, trying to find the thread that connected who I was to who I had become. I kept walking in the mornings, watching the light filter through the trees, breathing in the silence before the world stirred. I signed up for a community pottery class and surprised myself by how much I enjoyed getting my hands dirty. I started reading again, really reading books that stirred something in me, not just pass the time. One afternoon I sat in the back garden with a cup of tea and my journal. I hadn't written in it in years, but the words came quickly. I wrote about stillness, about awakening, about loneliness that wasn't loud but ever present. I wrote about being seen, not for how well I managed a home or kept peace or smiled through things, but for who I was beneath all that. I didn't write his name, but he was in every word. Mark had been the mirror, not the answer, not the future, just the reflection I hadn't been brave enough to look for myself. And what he showed me was that I was still in there. My husband noticed the change. He didn't always understand it, but he felt it. I was more present and paradoxically more distant, more honest and at times more elusive. He began asking small questions, trying to reach back into a space we had both abandoned. One evening, after I came home from class with clay still under my fingernails, he asked to see what I'd made. I brought it to him, an awkward, lopsided bowl, but he held it in his hands like it was a relic. "It's beautiful," he said. And for the first time in years, I believed he meant it. We started cooking dinner together once a week. At first, it was clumsy. He'd over-season something or forget to boil water, but we laughed, genuinely. And slowly, the silence between us softened. But even as we rebuilt something together, I knew that parts of me had changed in ways I couldn't reverse, and I didn't want to. Because what I had discovered wasn't about Mark, it was about agency. It was about choosing myself not over my marriage, but within it. That doesn't mean there weren't hard nights. There were times I sat in bed staring at my phone, wondering if I'd hear from him again. Sometimes I did. A book recommendation, a photograph, a memory. They came less often, but when they did, they still made my heart tighten. He never asked anything of me, never crossed a line, but I think we both knew that what passed between us had changed us permanently. He had reminded me how it felt to be visible. One message in particular stayed with me. What you settle for is often what you'll become. Just make sure it's really yours. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew the message wasn't about him. It was about me. That spring, I planted flowers in the garden I had ignored for years. I painted the guest room, not because I was preparing for anyone, but because I was reclaiming the space for me. I filled it with soft fabrics, a chair by the window, a lamp that gave off golden light, a room that invited peace, not memory. I began speaking with my husband more candidly. I told him I wanted to travel, that I wanted to work part-time again, that I missed parts of myself I hadn't seen in a decade. He was quiet at first. Then one day he said, "I want to know that version of you too," and that mattered. Our marriage wasn't magically transformed, but it became real again, messy, honest, sometimes strained, but at least we were no longer pretending we were fine. One evening, while folding laundry together, he looked at me and said, "I know I've taken you for granted." I didn't say anything. He added, "I want to do better. I want to really see you again." And in that moment, I realized something: forgiveness doesn't always come from a single apology. Sometimes it arrives in small, repeated gestures, in the quiet effort to show up differently. I never told him about Mark's final message, the one he left before he moved away. "Thank you for helping me remember that connection doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it just has to be true." That message had sat in my inbox for weeks. I never deleted it, but I didn't revisit it either, because I had made peace with it. Not the kind of peace that forgets, but the kind that integrates, that honors what something meant and lets it stay where it belongs. Now, months later, I still walk every morning, still glaze bowls that wobble, still hum softly while I stir pasta, and sometimes when I catch my husband watching me, not with obligation but with tenderness, I realize how far we've come and how much I've come back to myself. We're not perfect, but we're honest now. And that, more than anything, is what Mark gave me. Not a new life, but the courage to reclaim the one I already had. Some stories don't end with a kiss or a dramatic goodbye at the airport or a love confessed. Some stories end quietly with a shift so deep, so personal, it's nearly invisible from the outside. But inside, everything changes. What began as an ordinary evening, a dinner party laughter echoing through warm hallways, ended up becoming the start of my personal reawakening. Not because of a man, not because of temptation, but because for the first time in years, someone looked at me and really saw me. And I realized I hadn't been seeing myself. Mark didn't save me. He didn't rescue me. But he opened a door I didn't know was locked. He reminded me that I was still alive beneath the routine, that I was still capable of being moved, noticed, curious, and brave. And from that, I found the courage to start walking back toward myself. Slowly, imperfectly, honestly. Today, my life looks much the same from the outside. I still wake early, I still fold laundry, I still make dinner for two. But the woman doing those things is no longer asleep. She is awake, asking questions, dreaming quietly, letting herself be whole. Not because she left her life, but because she returned to it with eyes open. So, to you, the one watching maybe with your own quiet questions. Have you been seen lately? Have you paused long enough to notice if you're still humming, still breathing deeply, still choosing yourself in the small moments? And if not, what would it take to return to you? Because sometimes the person who wakes you up isn't the one you end up with. And that's okay. What matters is who you become after the awakening. That's the story that matters. If this story made you feel something, anything, please like this video, leave us a comment and tell us. Have you ever had a moment that changed how you saw yourself? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your reflections, your truths. And if you believe in the quiet power of emotional storytelling, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us keep telling real, raw, human stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Because sometimes just being heard is where healing begins.